Welcome back. You stayed. I knew you would. Because last time I left you in a very specific place. And if I know anything about human beings, and after 1001 nights, I know quite a lot. I know that an unfinished story is a physical thing. It sits inside you. It won't let you rest. So, before we go anywhere new tonight, let us finish what Shahrazad started. You remember where we left her, the palace chamber, the deep middle of the night. King Shahryar leaning forward without realizing it. The story of the merchant and the genie. The date stone that struck something invisible. The enormous jinn with his sword of light. The merchant given 1 year to prepare for his own death. And 3 old men at the base of a tree. Each one with a strange animal. Each one with a story. The first old man had already spoken. His tale of a wife turned to stone by jealousy and a husband left to wonder. And the genie, true to his word, forgave 1/3 of the merchant's blood. The second old man stepped forward. His name doesn't matter. What matters is what he carried with him. 2 black dogs on a single leash, as large as wolves, as quiet as shadows. And his story was this. These 2 dogs were once his brothers, human brothers, flesh and blood and shared childhood. But envy had made them dangerous. They had tried twice to destroy him, and twice he had forgiven them. The 3rd time, his wife, who was a sorceress and not the patient kind, transformed them, not into wolves, not into something fierce and noble, into dogs, the most ordinary, domestic, dependent of creatures, because that was the punishment that fit the crime. Men who had treated their brother like property became something that lives at the heel of another. The genie was moved. He forgave the 2/3 of the merchant's blood. The 3rd old man stepped forward with his mule, and his story was stranger still. A wife turned to a mule by her own darkness. A husband who knew it and kept her anyway, because love is sometimes more complicated than justice. The genie forgave the final 1/3. The merchant was free. Free! Free! After a year of carrying his own death in his chest like a stone, he was free. King Shahryar lay very still in the dark. The story was over. And Shahrazad, without pausing, without letting the silence settle into something he could act on, said, and just like that, the second night began. Baghdad, a Tuesday morning in the early 9th century. The city is already awake. It is always already awake. There is no quiet hour in Baghdad the way there is a quiet hour in a village. Someone is always selling something. Someone is always arguing about the price. Someone is always carrying something impossibly heavy through a street that is too narrow for the thing they are carrying. Among the carriers that morning is a young man. His name, and this detail is one of the great pleasures of the original text, is also Sinbad. We will call him Sinbad the Porter, to separate him from the other Sinbad, the one whose story this actually is. But for this morning, the porter is our way in. The porter is tired. He has been carrying loads through the city since before sunrise. The sun is now directly overhead. His back aches, the way backs ache when the body is doing work the soul did not agree to. He is not poor by the standards of the street. He has food. He has shelter. He has enough. But enough on a hot Tuesday in Baghdad can feel very much like nothing at all. He stops to rest in the shade of a great gate. He sets down his load. He tilts his head back against the cool stone, and he begins to do what tired people have always done when the world seems arranged specifically against them. He complains, not out loud, to himself, in the way that private conversations are the most honest conversations, because there is no one listening to be impressed or offended. He thinks, why is the world arranged this way? Why do some men carry things and other men own things? Why does one man wake up and decide where his ship will sail, and another man wake up and carry other people's goods onto that ship? Is this fate? Is this the will of God? Is this simply the accident of which family you were born into and which street you grew up on? These are not small questions. These are the questions that every person who has ever worked hard for very little has asked at least once in their life. And then, as if the universe had been eavesdropping and decided to respond, the gate opens. Music pours out. Real music. Oud and flute and the delicate percussion of a gathering that has nothing to prove because it already has has everything. The scent of jasmine and roasting meat. The sound of men laughing in the specific way that men laugh when they are full and comfortable and have nowhere they need to be. A servant steps outside. He looks at the porter with the practiced assessment of someone who manages large households and says. The porter blinks. He had not realized he had been speaking out loud. He gives his name, Sinbad. The servant disappears inside, returns almost immediately. The porter enters the house, and the house is, there is no more precise word, extraordinary. Not in the decorated way of a man who wants you to know he is wealthy, in the deeper way of a man who has been to places you cannot imagine and brought back things that have no name in any language you speak. Carpets from lands so distant they do not appear on any map in Baghdad's library, carved furniture from trees that do not grow in Arabia, vessels of glass in colors that should not exist, animals in a courtyard cages that the porter has never seen and cannot name. And in the center of it all, on a wide cushioned seat, surrounded by men of every age and every nation, an old man, white-bearded, still powerful in the way that some men carry power all the way into their final years. It sits in the shoulders, in the steadiness of the eyes. His face is weathered, not in the way of a farmer who has spent years under the sun, in the way of a man who has spent years on the water. A face that has squinted into ocean horizons until the squint became permanent. He looks at the porter for a long moment, then he smiles, and he says, The old sailor poured wine for the porter and himself, settled deeper into his cushions, looked at the ceiling for a moment, in the way of someone deciding where to begin a story that has many possible beginnings. And then he began. I was not always this. You look at this house, these things, these men at my table who have sailed every sea that has a name and several that do not, and you assume I was born into it. I was not. My father was a merchant, a good one. When he died, he left me what he had built over a lifetime of careful decisions and early mornings. I spent it in about 3 years, not in one spectacular disaster, but in the steady, comfortable, entirely ordinary way that young men with money and no wisdom spend it. A little here, a little there. Good company, good food, good everything. Until one morning, I looked at the accounts, and the accounts looked back at me, and we both had the same conclusion. I had 2 choices. I could go back to what my father had done, become a merchant of the careful, land-based, ledger-studying variety, build slowly, spend less than I earned, grow old, comfortable, and slightly bored. Or I could go to sea. I went to sea. Now, here it is worth pausing to understand what going to sea actually meant in 9th century Basra, because it was not the casual thing it might sound like. Basra sat at the mouth of the Shatt al-Arab, the great waterway where the Tigris and Euphrates rivers met and poured into the Persian Gulf. It was the most important trading port in the Islamic world. Ships came through Basra from India, from China, from the coast of East Africa, from the islands of Southeast Asia. Goods that had traveled 10,000 miles by the time they arrived. And the merchants who made those journeys, the ones who sailed outward rather than simply buying and selling what others brought in, were considered a particular breed of human being. Not quite soldiers, not quite scholars, something else entirely. Men who had decided very deliberately that the unknown was more interesting than the known. I sold what I had left. Not much. Enough to buy a share in a merchant cargo. Spices, cloth, some worked metal. I found a ship leaving for the islands of the Indian Ocean and I bought passage on it. I was young. I was not afraid. This was, I understand now, because I had absolutely no idea what I was about to encounter. Ignorance is a remarkably efficient cure for fear. The ship left Basra on a morning in early spring. The river smell gave way to the salt smell of the Gulf. The buildings of the city shrank behind us until they were a pale smudge on the horizon. And then there was nothing in any direction but water. Blue-green water, very clear, very deep, with a light breeze from the north that filled the sail and moved us at a steady and purposeful pace toward the open Indian Ocean. I remember standing at the bow of that ship and feeling something I did not expect. Not excitement, though there was excitement. Not fear, though there was a very small, very sensible fear running quietly under everything else. What I felt most powerfully was rightness, as if this, the motion of a ship, the open horizon, the constant slight adjustment required to stay on your feet on a deck that moves beneath you, was something my body already knew how to do, had always known. Some people are made for dry land. They know where they are when the ground is still beneath their feet. They understand rooms and roads and the predictable weight of a solid world. I was made for movement, for the world that never holds still. We sailed for several weeks, stopping at ports, trading, watching the world change as we moved further from everything familiar. The people's faces changed, the languages changed, the smells of the dockside markets changed. The spices grew stranger and more intoxicating. The fruits were things I had no names for. The stars at night arranged themselves differently than they did over Baghdad. Even the sky was new. And then, on a warm afternoon when the wind had gone quiet and the sea was very flat and very still, our captain brought the ship to a stop. He pointed ahead and he said, "The island was beautiful. I want you to hold that word, beautiful. Not merely pleasant or convenient or adequate. Beautiful. In the way that the natural world is beautiful when it has been left entirely alone, when no human hand has shaped it or named it or decided what it is for. The trees were enormous, ancient looking, with roots that spread wide across the dark soil, and canopies so dense that the sunlight came through them in columns, like light through the windows of a great hall. Flowers I had never seen grew between the roots, in colors that seemed, in that light, slightly too vivid, the red too red, the yellow almost luminous. Birds called from somewhere in the canopy in voices that sounded, if you were not paying careful attention, almost like words in a language you had nearly forgotten. Fresh water ran in a clear stream near the shoreline. The stream was cold in the way that only natural running water is cold, alive with it, as if the cold was a property of the movement itself rather than simply the temperature. We filled every vessel we had. The crew spread across the island with the specific energy of men who have been at sea for weeks. That combination of relief and restlessness that makes people move around more than they need to, touching things, exploring small distances, simply because they can, because the ground holds still. Someone found fruit, someone else found more firewood than we could carry. The cook, a small, efficient man from Oman, who could make anything taste better than it had any right to, began to set up his fires with the focused pleasure of a craftsman in his element. I found a flat rock near the waterline and sat down, took off my shoes, let the warm, dark soil press up between my toes, ate fruit that tasted of honey, and something sharper, something citrus adjacent, something I could not identify and did not need to. Watched the ship at anchor in the shallow water, swaying slightly in a breeze that barely existed. I was, in that moment, completely and entirely content. The kind of contentment that arrives without announcing itself. You only notice it because everything has gone quiet in a way that feels like a gift. I should have noticed something else, but I was not paying the right kind of attention. The fires were lit as the sun moved toward the horizon. The cook worked with his assistants over the largest fire. Other smaller fires were lit by sailors in clusters of 3 or 4, the way men make small, private warmths when the communal one feels too large. The smell of cooking food, the sound of the sea against the shore, the comfortable noise of men who have nothing to fear. The island moved. Not a tremor, not the sea shifting beneath it, not an earthquake. The island moved the way a living thing moves when it wakes up. A slow, massive, from the inside movement that sent the water around it rushing outward in a ring. The cook's fires went sideways. I heard the captain's voice before I understood what it was saying. It was the voice a man uses when he has understood something terrible, faster than anyone else, and has perhaps half a second to act on it. I ran, not because I understood, because he understood, and his certainty was more than enough. The ground was moving beneath my feet, not shaking, breathing. Long, slow, enormous breaths that sent vibrations through the soil that I could feel in my jaw. Men were running in every direction, some toward the ship, some away from it in pure, unthinking panic, some standing absolutely still with the look of people whose minds have simply refused to process what their bodies are reporting. I was almost at the waterline when the island went down. Not gradually, not like a tide going out, down, fast, the way a living creature dives when it has been disturbed, because that is what it was. A creature of the largest size I have ever seen, or will ever see, a whale of a size that I cannot give you an honest number for, because the numbers I have tried to use have never sounded true. It had been sleeping on the surface for so long, decades perhaps, centuries, that soil had accumulated on its back, trees had taken root, flowers had grown, streams had formed from rainfall that gathered in the ridges of its skin. We had landed our ship on the back of a sleeping ocean God, and we had lit fires on it. Even the whale has its limits. The sea was suddenly full of men and wreckage, crates, rope, cookware, clothing, the ordinary contents of an ordinary voyage, scattered across the water in an instant. Men calling out, men not calling out. I grabbed the first solid thing I found, a large wooden tub, one of the cook's water basins, still sealed, still buoyant. I got both arms over it, and I held on with everything I had. The ship was gone. The island was gone. The men who had reached the ship in time were gone with it, carried away by the current and the shock of the whale's dive, too fast and too far for anyone in the water to catch. And I was alone in the Indian Ocean, holding a wooden tub. Let me tell you something about being alone in the open ocean that you cannot fully understand until you have been there. The size of not the danger, the size. The way the water goes in every direction to every horizon, and there is nothing in any of those directions. No line, no shape, no reference point. Nothing to tell your eyes where up ends and forward begins. The sky above and the sea below, and you in the center of it, holding a piece of wood, and the entire universe has contracted to the diameter of that tub. This is the truest loneliness there is. Not the loneliness of being without people, the loneliness of being without land. I prayed. I will not tell you the specific words because they were not elegant prayers. They were the prayers of a young man who has spent 3 years being careless with everything his father built and has now arrived at the natural conclusion of carelessness, floating in the ocean on a cooking basin with the sun going down. I asked forgiveness for the money I had wasted. I asked for a specific miracle involving land in any direction. I told God I would be more careful. I meant it completely. I suspect God had heard this particular speech before. The night came. And this is the thing about the open ocean at night that no one who has not seen it can fully picture. The stars. Not the stars as you see them from a city, washed out by lamplight and the haze of 10,000 cooking fires. The stars as they actually are. Every one of them. All of them. A sky so full that the darkness between them seems almost incidental. A river of light directly overhead, so bright and so detailed that you could navigate by it if you knew how. I did not know how, but it was beautiful enough that for a while I forgot to be afraid. The current moved me. The ocean has its own roads, invisible, specific, as purposeful in their way as the trade routes of Baghdad. Cold rivers within the warm sea, traveling from somewhere to somewhere, and if you are in the water and you cannot fight them, they take you where they are going. The current took me for 3 days and 3 nights. I slept in short intervals, head on my arms, still holding the tub. I drank the last of the water in the tub on the 2nd day. Thirst, I discovered, is a different kind of problem than hunger. Hunger is a complaint. Thirst is an argument you cannot win. On the morning of the 4th day, the current pushed me towards something. I heard it before I saw it. The sound of water breaking against something solid. A sound so specific, so different from the sound of open ocean that my body woke up before my mind did. Rocks. And behind the rocks, trees. Actual, rooted, stationary trees. The kind that do not dive when you light fires near them. I swam. The tub went. I did not care about the tub anymore. I swam until my hands found rock and I pulled myself up and I lay on the warm stone for a very long time, breathing. I was alive. Barely. Complete. Which is the only way to be alive when it actually matters. The island was real. I confirmed this carefully before I did anything else. Solid ground. Unmoving. Trees that were simply trees. Fresh water in a stream that ran down from higher ground and tasted of minerals and cold and everything that the ocean had not been. I drank until I could not drink anymore. I found fruit. I built a small shelter from palm leaves near the water's edge. I did all of this slowly and methodically and without thinking much about the immediate task, the way the mind works when it has been through something large and needs time to process before it is ready to feel any of it. I stayed on that island for 2 days, and on the 3rd day, I heard it. A sail on the horizon. A single white sail, very far away, moving across the water at the angle of something that might come close or might pass completely out of reach. I ran to the highest point of the island. I tore the cloth cloth from my back. I waved it. I shouted. I was not too dignified to shout. A man who has spent 3 nights on a cooking basin in the Indian Ocean has left dignity somewhere in the water and is not going backward. The ship turned very slowly. The sail adjusted. The heading changed. It was coming toward me. A boat was lowered. 2 sailors rowed to shore. They looked at me with the particular expression of men who encounter things at sea that do not fit their expectations and have learned to simply proceed. One of them said, "Who are you? How did you come to be here?" I told them, not the full story, the short version. Ship, whale, water, tub, here. The sailor nodded in the way of a man who has heard stranger things and has specific work to do before sunset. He said, "Come, the captain will want to hear this." On the deck of the ship, I was given water and food and a dry robe, and then the captain came to speak to me. And the captain looked at me for a long moment and then said something that I have thought about almost every day since for the rest of my life. "I know who you are. Your name is Sinbad. I have your goods aboard this ship." My goods? The cargo I had purchased with the last of my inheritance and left in the hold of my original ship before the whale, before the water, before the tub. My goods were here. The captain explained. When the whale sounded and the sailors who had reached the ship in time pulled away, there was confusion about who had made it and who had not. The manifests showed my name and my goods. The captain, a careful man, an honest man, the kind of captain who takes other people's property seriously, had held my cargo on the small hope, on the very small, entirely irrational but stubbornly persistent hope that the man whose name was on the manifest might still be alive somewhere. I have never fully decided whether what happened next was God or fate or the mathematical certainty that if you drift in a current for long enough, you will eventually intersect with the shipping lane. Perhaps all 3 are the same thing, called by different names by people who need different kinds of comfort. What I know is this: the sea had taken everything I had, and then, with no obligation to do so, it gave it back. We continued the voyage. I traded my cargo at the next port and made a profit. Then a larger profit at the port after that. By the time the ship turned back toward Basra, I had what I had started with multiplied by several. I came home to Baghdad, richer than I had left, with stories that no amount of money could have purchased, and with the specific knowledge, the kind that settles into the body and stays there, that the world is vast, that there are things in it that will break your understanding of what the world can contain, that the only way to meet those things is to go toward them. The old sailor stopped talking, poured more wine, looked at the porter across the table with the specific attention of a man checking whether what he said has landed. The porter was quiet for a moment. Then he said slowly, "You began with what I was thinking at your gate. You began with the question of why some men have so much and others so little." Sinbad the sailor nodded and said, "I began there because that is where I began, when I was young and careless and the world owed me everything. But the sea taught me a different question. Not why do some men have more, but what are you willing to risk to find out what you are capable of? The answer to that question is the only one that matters, and the ocean is a very thorough teacher." Back in the palace chamber, King Shahrayar had not moved. The night had gone deep, the lamps had burned very low, and Shahrazad's voice had been the only sound in that room for hours, weaving Sinbad's story inside the story of the merchant, inside the story of the king's long, dark night of cruelty and grief. She stopped, let the silence breathe for a moment, and then said very quietly, "Sire, the dawn is not yet here." Sinbad sent the porter home at night with 100 gold coins and an invitation to return tomorrow to hear the second voyage. And the second voyage is far stranger than the first. The king said nothing. He did not need to say anything. The silence was already his answer. There are 7 voyages of Sinbad, 7 journeys into a world that has no mercy for the unprepared and no limit for the courageous. In the second voyage, Sinbad will find himself stranded on a different island, alone again, ship gone again. The universe apparently having a very specific lesson it needs him to learn more than once. This time, he will find something that changes the economy of an entire civilization, and he will discover a creature that should not exist in a valley where it is impossible to stand without something trying to kill you. But that is for the third night. If Sinbad kept you company tonight, subscribe, hit the bell. There are 6 6 more voyages before we are done with him, and after him, a cave, a password, a lamp in a forgotten tunnel, and a fisherman pulls something out of the sea that has been waiting for 1800 years. The second night ends, the next one begins.